We could have made you hold the award the whole time, but you can just take it home with you. Howard, it's such a pleasure to have the opportunity to sit down with you, and thank you so much for accepting our Impact Award. I think there's no one more deserving for how much you and the foundation have done for Ukraine. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Glad to be here.
So I just wanted to get into a conversation with you. And I wanted to start with some numbers that I don't know if everybody's aware of exactly how much you've done. Since the full-scale invasion, the foundation has provided more than $1 billion to Ukrainian resilience and reconstruction. You've supplied, it's incredible. You supplied 450 million meals across Ukraine.
I ate a lot of those myself.
Yes. And you yourself have visited Ukraine 22 times, is that right?
Yes, and I was in Ukraine in 1991, before independence, believe it or not.
Oh, wow, so was I.
Of course. I was looking for you, but I couldn't.
So I think just these numbers are just incredible. It's amazing what you've done and the foundation in so many different countries. But I got the feeling, reading a little bit about you, listening to some of your previous speeches and interviews, that there's really something special about Ukraine for you, despite all the amazing work you're doing across the world. So what is it about Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot of things about Ukraine that I love and that I appreciate. But, I read a quote by General Crystal had written about 6 months ago. And when I read it, I realized that it was exactly why I ended up coming to Ukraine in early 2022. And he said something, I won't get it exactly right, but something like, in your personal life, you'll have a test from time to time, and it will test you in terms of whether or not you have the strength and the compassion to do what's right. To me, when the full-scale invasion occurred, it was obvious that this was going to be the biggest event for global impact during my lifetime. I saw it that way immediately. And almost 4 years later, the truth is I underestimated it. And so I wouldn't say that when the full-scale invasion occurred, I felt an obligation, because that's not quite the right word, but I can never find the right word to describe it, because I felt that I had to go to Ukraine, and I actually wasn't sure how to do it. My friend Shannon, who is here tonight, figured it out and got me on the first trip, so you have to thank her too. But once she got me there, then I kept going back. But the point is that I saw it as something where if our foundation didn't step up, do it fast, and do it big, that I felt that I would regret that the rest of my life. And that's what took me to Ukraine.
So staying with the theme of Ukraine being a special place for you, now especially, and you visited so many times, you met so many amazing people there. I heard that you're not one that usually celebrates birthdays. And I've also heard that you recently changed that, and you've actually celebrated your last 2 birthdays in Ukraine, and you're going to celebrate your next birthday in Ukraine too. Is that right? Did I get all this intel right?
That's correct. And my wife says now, and she'll say it again in December, she'll say, why are you going to Ukraine for your birthday? And the fact is, Ukraine just has better ice cream and cake. So, I mean, I have more friends in Ukraine today than I do at home. So where else am I going to go?
So you took my question right out of my mouth, actually. I was going to say, what makes Ukraine so great that you want to celebrate your birthdays there? Is it just the ice cream cake?
Well, the first year it just happened. And then the second year, I felt like, we should do this again. And this time, now it's become kind of a tradition. And the list gets bigger and bigger. And, it's hard to celebrate anything with what's happening in Ukraine But what I've learned, and I've learned this with my friends on the front line, and you know, it's important to show up. It's important that people see you, that they know that you're thinking about them, that you care about them. And so, in a way, my birthday party has become a refuge for 2 or 3 hours to forget about the war and just be friends.
I think that is a very good reason to celebrate your birthday in Ukraine. So I wanted to ask you about maybe a slightly more difficult topic, which is that you've been to the front lines quite a bit as well during your trips, and you really witnessed, I think, firsthand the brutality and the atrocities committed in this war. You've invested a lot of the foundation's work in things like building prosthetics, demining, children's welfare, humanitarian relief. The list goes on. But just reading as to all the amazing things the foundation has done, I wanted to ask you, how do you decide out of all the many needs in Ukraine, which issues to tackle or causes to back when there's just so many?
The First Lady tells me what to do. That's a bit of a joke because
she's someone to listen to, I think.
Oh yeah, no, but it's actually there's a lot of truth to it. But it's a joke we have together because it's just when she does ask me to do something, I can't say no to her. So I joke that I have two people in my life I can't say no to, my wife and the First Lady. But anyway, but the First Lady's actually cost me a lot more money. But but the truth is, if you looked at everywhere else we've worked in the world, you'd see more continuity and you would see more of a strategy, I think, whether it's Colombia or Congo or, wherever it is. And because we've worked in a lot of conflict and post-conflict areas, but we've never worked where there's a real war, and it's different. And I would say I've had to learn to listen better. I've had to make adjustments in my mindset, in my thinking, and we do things in Ukraine that we wouldn't do anywhere else. We've built a major bridge. I mean, we don't go build bridges anywhere, but it was a need for that at the time, and we did it. The first time I met the First Lady, I went in with this idea about I want to talk to her about school feeding for kids. And so we went in and I listened to her, and she actually wanted to talk about school feeding for kids, and her idea was much better than mine. And so we built, so far we're on our third facility that is like a hub for a feeding hub for schools, like 50, 60 schools. We would never do that anywhere else. So I could give you a long list of things, but the fact is that we've tried to respond to what the greatest need is. We've tried to respond to the people that we trust and have impact doing it. And the one thing, when I say people that we trust, the one thing I've learned, that Ukraine has taught me a lot of things, but one thing it taught me for certain is during a war, you don't have the luxury of trying to take the time to figure things out. And so you don't have the luxury of building relationships. You have to learn very quickly who you can trust, who you can believe. And so I have probably made more great friends in Ukraine in the last few years than I've ever made in this country. And it's because war accelerates everything, and you don't know what's around the corner. And I used to say to some of my friends, I'd say, well, I'll see when I come back. And they would say, I hope so. It has a complete different meaning in war. And so it's really, Ukraine has been an amazing teacher to me, the Ukrainian people.
So I just want to stay with that topic a little bit. You've already mentioned the many friends you made in Ukraine over the years. Is there the story of an individual that you met that really stands out to you as a particular inspiration, or an explanation for why, despite all the painful losses that Ukraine is experiencing, that the Ukrainians still keep on fighting? Is there someone that stands out in your mind?
There's a lot of people that I think are inspiring. I mean, immediately you just have to say all of the men and women that are on the front line fighting. I mean, the courage and the tenacity of those people who are there, those individuals who are there, are really amazing. But I would start a little broader and then come down a little more narrow. Excuse me. I have seen an amazing amount of bravery from the women in Ukraine. And I could start with the First Lady. She didn't want to be where she is. She doesn't want to be in these circumstances. But she stepped up on a global stage and has taken a leadership role that's amazing. The Prime Minister, she has the toughest job in the world, alongside with a few other leaders in Ukraine. But the innovation and the commitment, the sacrifice of many Ukrainians, but particularly the women, I think is a real inspiration, because they have put aside their family, their children, their career, because they know that if they don't do what they need to do now, that country, their country, Ukraine, will not survive. So they have to do it. And I think, unfortunately, the world is not watching as closely as they need to be watching, because we could learn so much from the Ukrainian people. And I'll take it down then to a more specific, event or experience I had, I think it'd be 2 years ago, or over 2 years ago. And I walked into Superhumans for the first time, and there's Dennis. He's missing his 2 legs, his left arm, and he's sitting in a wheelchair, and we start talking. He doesn't speak a lot of English, but through a translator, and I immediately connected with him, and big hug. And I thought, if I was sitting in that chair like Dennis, what would be my mindset? What would I be thinking about? Would I be feeling bad for myself? Would I be angry? And you know what Dennis asked me? He said, will you help me do one thing? I want to be able to sit down with all of the other men and women that come in through here, through Superhumans, and know how to professionally advise them to be basically a psychologist, to be able to help them get through some of the worst, darkest moments of their life. And I said, of course we can do that. And that's an inspiration. I mean, this guy is sitting there, he got blown up in Bakhmut, and he wants to help other people. That's what he wants to do, and that's what he's doing today. Today, he is really amazing. I got there a few trips ago, and Olga says, Dennis is going to take you the last 2 miles down to Superhumans. And I go, what is she talking about? We pull up, and here's Dennis on a 3-wheel scooter. I go, I'm not getting on that thing with him. I mean, and I didn't have much choice, so I got on. It scared the hell out of me on the, 2 miles of terror, but we got there. And I mean, to see people that have gone through so much pain and suffering and watch their friends die and just come back stronger than ever. And it's really an amazing thing to see.
That's an amazing story. That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I actually think I've seen pictures of Dennis that someone shared with me of you together, and with his prosthetics now. And there's so much happiness that was radiating from him on that picture. So I'm glad you talked a little bit about him. I just have one last question for you, and it has more to do with, I think, the bigger picture around food security, which I know is so near and dear to your heart. And we, a few years ago, also honored the World Central Kitchen, which did so much in Ukraine to deliver food across the country. I find it interesting that even though Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe, and you referenced that yourself, we don't really talk about the effects on global food security anymore. That is a huge consequence of Russia's war in Ukraine. Why do you think that is?
Well, look, the honest truth is most people today don't think about farming and they don't think about agriculture because they take it for granted. Now, that may not be true in some countries in Africa or some countries in Central America or something, but here in the United States, we do that. In Europe, it's pretty much taken for granted. One of the biggest challenges will be demining agricultural fields, and we have been very engaged in that. And I think that is something that is one of the most important things we can do in terms of contributing to the economy in the future. But it's, I'll tell you a quick, short story. So people don't pay much attention to agriculture unless you're another farmer. Because I've had a lot of farmers in this country that were angry about Ukraine exports, even during the war, when the Black Sea Agreement was signed and enacted, and so now they're shipping out grain. And I'm thinking, for me, farmer or not farmer, it would be pretty hard for me to be mad at anybody who's in a country that is getting bombarded on a regular basis. But anyway, that's how they felt. So I was in Rwanda we have a big project in Rwanda, and these are all small, very small scale farmers, half acre or less. And I'm sitting there talking to a few of them, and I said, "How are things going?" He says, and this was a couple of years ago, and he says, "Things are great." And I said, why are they great? And he said, "Oh, corn prices have never been higher." I said, "Well, why are they higher?" He said, "Ukraine." I'm sitting in Rwanda with these small farmers, and that's the impact of what happened in Ukraine, was the fact that it rippled all the way through down into some little area in Africa. And that was the impact of what Russia did and is doing to Ukraine agriculture will continue to be felt for a long time. You just don't, you don't hear about it, but there's a lot of things you don't hear about that are happening in Ukraine. And that is one of the biggest challenges, is that people were never given the opportunity to understand why our engagement was so important. I lived through, I'll say one thing here, and I don't want to be political, but especially in Washington, D.C., right? But, I've lived through a number of conflicts through, I had an A1 draft notice when I was in high school. That's how old I am, for Vietnam. And they signed the armistice in '73 when I graduated. There's Desert Storm, there's Afghanistan, Iraq. And always, the President of the United States went on TV and explained to the American people the importance of what the United States was engaging in, the consequences if we didn't engage, and that didn't happen. So this country has never had an explanation at the level that it needs to have it of why we have to be in Ukraine. And this war is our war. And so the more we can do, all of us here, to make sure the American public understands the significance of this war and the consequences of this war is so important. And that's why I appreciate the award tonight. Our staff deserves all the credit, not me. But, this is not going to end well unless this country and the European countries act faster and stand up and become braver and show more courage. And that is what we have to do.
Howard, I think that's thank you for saying that, and couldn't agree with you more. And I think this is the right note to end this conversation on. Thank you for sharing all these amazing stories. And you obviously have such a deep personal connection to not just the country, but the Ukrainian people. And as a Ukrainian woman, thank you for all the praise. As many Ukrainian women here will probably say the same thing. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.